Hey there, Bear Club! At the Mama Bear Initiative, we explore how to protect ourselves so we can protect our cubs, the people who depend on us. Join us and get the confidence you need to stay safe, make good choices, and protect yourself and those you care about. Let's go!
Hello and welcome to the Mama Bear Initiative. I'm Stephanie Denham.
I'm Evelyn Mason.
And I'm Rochelle Knapp.
We'd like to thank you for joining us today on this podcast episode. Today's podcast is called Bruh. In the most long, drawn-out sense that you can use that word. Taking a little note from the Gen Z. We're going to be talking about negative consequences. Dealing with negative consequences specifically. We want to talk about what went wrong.
Yeah.
How did we end up here? Why did I do that? And even more importantly, what can I do differently in the future? As we've mentioned a couple times in other episodes that, we have free will. So in other episodes, we talked about the fact that we have free will, that we can make choices. And when we make a choice, we're also choosing what happens as a result of the action that we took or the thing that we said.
Right.
So this is dealing more specifically with that. And when we say consequences, there are negative and positive, maybe even sometimes neutral consequences. It's just the natural conclusion of something that happened.
Right.
But we want to deal specifically with the negative consequences. Positive consequences aren't really a problem, right?
Right. Okay. Wow, what could I do differently so that awesome thing doesn't happen again?
Yeah.
Who says that?
We kind of want more of those,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
If we take an action and something good happens, we kind of want to do it again.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So so the idea is that when we're dealing with negative outcomes, negative consequences of actions we've taken, whether it's something we did or something we said, we kind of want to take some time to evaluate what went wrong, because negative consequences are painful, right?
Very.
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah. And, I personally have had a lot of negative consequences in my life of actions I've taken, things I've said, things I've done, things I'm still dealing with. I've mentioned before that I have PTSD from like extensive childhood trauma, and one of my symptoms has been binge eating. Now I say binge eating, but it's not like the disorder, the diagnosable disorder where I'm like constantly in this cycle of eating and binging and eating and binging and then vomiting. It's more of, something emotional happens and I might, for a period, and it could be a day, it could be a week, it could be a month, where I'm, eating a lot of things that are not good for me, which increases my weight.
Right. Yeah.
And so, one of the negative consequences for myself is being overweight and lots of health issues that have come with that. And I know that there's a lot of talk out there about body positivity and what people feel about being overweight, not feeling bad about it, whatever. And that's not the purpose of what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, for myself, I've had a lot of issues because I'm overweight, a lot of health issues, surgeries because of hernias and other things that are, that this is the natural consequence of me choosing to overeat at various times in my life.
Right.
And I've gotten a handle on it for the most part. I can't say I'm doing it perfectly, but, I recognize that, this is something I've chosen to do.
Right.
Even if it's born out of PTSD, I'm still making the choice to eat 5 extra cookies or something.
Right.
So do you guys have any times in your life where you were dealing with a negative consequence of some action you've taken?
I have the same issue with food, as far as emotionally reacting to something and binging.
Mm,
And
yeah.
as you said, Stephanie, it's not the same as a cycle of binging and purging. It's more of like something comes up and I'll eat a lot of sugar in a day or a couple of days, and I feel terrible physically. So that helps me to stop doing it. But the emotions don't go away,
Right.
and it could also bring in negative thoughts or just an ongoing cycle of feeling tired, frustrated, emotional, whatever, and regret for having the binge in the first place.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I know for me, talking about physical things, I have a lung issue. And one of the things that I was told was to do things to increase my lung capacity. You know how a lot of times runners can have more than 100% lung capacity because they actually grow their lungs. Their lungs are larger and they're more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I end up a lot of times in this cycle of I don't really have time to do that. So then I feel worse.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can't do as much. And then I want to not do it, tell myself, well, it's going to be too hard. You don't have time. And I've found lately, the situation hasn't gotten better. And I'm also having the effects of not being as fit as I was.
Mm.
So then the aches are aching a little more. Having to go up a couple flight of steps, I have to catch my breath, which is sort of the opposite of what I'm supposed to do, to increase my lung capacity.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. I mean, my binging problem, being as it is probably going to be a lifelong struggle, but I can choose to change things over time.
Yeah.
To a more positive, more beneficial way of behaving whenever I'm feeling challenged by something that's going on in my life.
Yeah.
So the thing we're going to talk about is sort of that process of how do you go from, dealing with a choice you've made to making better choices in the future, because at some point you kind of have to get to a place of enough is enough.
Right.
Yes.
And I know a lot of people, I don't know, it seems like a lot of people kind of choose just to exist in their paradigm and not try to make any changes, not try to make things better.
Yeah.
And there's almost feels like they're just waiting to die kind of a thing.
Right. Or even just saying, well, this is the way I am. This is the way things will always be.
Yeah.
And not even giving themselves a chance to say, well, what could I do differently? Maybe things could be better. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the concept that, when we were talking about what we wanted to talk about, the concept of bruh is sort of like, what are you doing?
Right.
Why are you doing this thing? And you can, say that to another person. You can also say that to yourself. Like,
right.
What are you doing and why are you doing it?
Yes. Yeah.
And so when we're faced with these challenges and we make a bad choice and we want to make a change, we have to start somewhere.
Right.
Yes.
So I think the greatest thing you can do to begin the process is to ask yourself, what went wrong?
Yeah.
Like, how did we get here?
Right. That's the phrase I was thinking of, like, oh, I'm here, but how did I get here?
Right. And that can be a pretty emotional thing,
Yeah.
It's hard to examine oneself in a deeper way. What are my motivations? Maybe there's something from your past that is causing you to behave the way that you are that you don't want to look at.
Yeah, because there's so many negative things associated with it. It's so much easier to just go, well, maybe I'll deal with that later. I don't want to look at that.
Right.
As if it will go away, but it doesn't. I think one of the hardest things is to try to be objective
Right.
especially when there's a lot of emotions or, like shame and other things attached
Right.
to even look at it.
Right. And looking at things objectively requires a little bit of analytical thinking, I believe.
Right.
Like stepping outside of your own mind and looking at yourself in a different lens. Because I think, I know I do this. I think a lot of people kind of look at themselves in a very negative light.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
I know there's some people who look at themselves in a positive light, and some people who look at themselves in a narcissistic light,
Right.
where they're the best thing that ever happened, or whatever.
Toxic positivity.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm awesome.
But I think if you tend to be negative towards yourself or negative about your choices, it's easy to not be objective
Right.
about what you're doing and why you're doing it.
I think one of the things that helps me is to go at it as though I was arriving at an accident scene. Like, let's say I'm a first responder or something, where I'm just being objective. I don't know these people. I don't really know what happened at all. I'm just showing up. I have, I shouldn't say at all. I have a little bit of information.
Mm-hmm.
But being able to look around and say, okay, we've got that car in a ditch. That guy, it looks like he's passed out. And, to be able to just assess what is here.
Right. Mm-hmm. Which I think it requires taking the emotion out a little bit.
Yeah.
Any fear, any anger or sadness, just sort of setting that aside for the moment.
Yeah.
I found when you do that, it helps you solve the problem faster if you have a problem to solve. You can remove the emotion from the situation. You can figure out a solution quicker because we have the capacity to deal with our emotions later. It does take some skill, but it is possible to do that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've done that several occasions recently. Just take the emotion out, think it through, and try to resolve it and then deal with the emotions later. Because we know they won't go away. So we have to deal with
That's
that
right.
at some point.
Yeah, and it's so good to do that instead of stuffing it. It's like, all right, well, I'm going to put you in a box and I'm going to open you later. And, like you were saying about being able to solve it quicker, I think it's because you can think clearly. Emotions certainly cloud our thinking and can also influence how we perceive things, as far as we might not even be dealing with the full reality.
Right.
If we let our emotions take charge.
Right.
Especially if it's a triggering thing where we've got, Steph mentioned PTSD. I also have PTSD, and I can go into a mental place that's based on a thing that happened in the past that may or may not have anything to do with what's in front of me. So how could I possibly solve it rationally when I can't even see what reality is in that moment?
Yeah, our emotional triggers, emotional reactions kind of distort reality, to be honest. And with my anxiety issues, one of the things that I struggle with is forecasting the future. Mm-hmm. And my version of what could happen tends to be really overblown. Mm-hmm. And going into catastrophic thinking, for example. The tendency to create scenarios of things that could possibly happen, although probably won't happen, really is just distorted reality based on my need to be safe.
Right.
And that's what I'm attempting to do, is to create safety for myself.
Right.
So when I'm struggling with something, it helps to step back into what my therapist calls the wise mind.
I like that phrase. So what do you mean by the wise mind?
Well, it's the same thing as what we're talking about of defining what happened in objective terms. It's sort of being an adult about the situation and looking at things with some sort of wisdom. So if I'm trying to forecast the future about something, I have to ask myself questions like, is that likely to happen?
Mhm.
And, or say things like, you really don't know right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to wait for the information. So that means stepping out of the fear and the terror of what could happen and into a space where I'm sort of parenting myself
Right.
and allowing myself to just not know.
So it's adding balance, it's adding, well, wisdom by definition, right?
Right.
I find it helpful when I go to a catastrophic place or am tempted to remind myself something good could come too. You know, like,
True.
why is it always, the end of the world? But there again is that idea of safety.
Right. Right.
We want to be prepared for the worst case scenario, right?
Right. Which is why dealing with your emotions makes this kind of thing so hard.
Right.
I'm not saying you shouldn't deal with your emotions about whatever it is you're struggling with. What we're saying is set those aside for a moment. Allow yourself some space to think objectively about what happened
Right.
and why you're suffering this negative consequence in your life, so
Right.
that you can get to the next step. And one major thing, and this is super hard because it's hard for me, I know it's hard for everybody else, is admitting that I chose to do a harmful thing.
Oh, that I chose to.
Yeah.
Can't say the devil made me do it.
Right.
Or I did it because you did.
Or, yeah, because a lot of times we take a victim stance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this thing happened, so I just couldn't help myself and I went and did this thing. But that's not honest. It's
Right.
That's true.
It's not honest to say that because everybody has culpability and responsibility.
Right.
There are times where someone is truly victimized
True.
and they have no control in the situation.
Yeah.
That does happen. So I don't want anybody thinking that we don't recognize that.
Yeah.
We're not talking about those moments. We're talking about moments where you decided to do something and now you're dealing with the outcome of that. So admitting to yourself that you chose to do that thing
Yeah.
gives you some responsibility for yourself,
Right.
for how you hurt another person.
Right. And that's really such a foundational lining up with reality.
Right.
Yes, I did this thing. Once we accept, yes, I did that, now I can look at the effects. Because I did that, this happened. And also realizing, I think it's really freeing to realize that we do have a choice, which means we're not subject to whatever whims pop into our heads or whatever the circumstances are. But we can, as we've discussed in previous podcasts, we can take a moment, make a choice. There's almost never a situation where you don't have at least a few seconds before the thing happens and, our reaction.
Right.
In my experience, it's hard for people to admit the truth of what they've done wrong. And
true.
For myself, that's been a struggle at times as well, and taking responsibility in something I've done wrong. And I think because other people are critical and they attach shame to the action and they take it way too far, just makes it harder to admit, hey, I did this wrong thing. I found people surprised when I've admitted I did something wrong.
Yeah. And I was thinking about how some of this can stem from childhood. Mm-hmm. For example, tell me what you did. Right. And I say, well, I stole that thing. You stole that thing. That makes you a thief. Right. And then I think, even though I don't want to lie, there again, Steph was mentioning self-protection. Maybe I could say it differently, or maybe I could, somehow twist it a little to protect myself from a negative consequence. Mm-hmm. And isn't that ironic? Because we're talking about, but ultimately what happens then is I may create a pattern of lying and even lying to myself. And there it is, removing from reality. So being able to say, this is my part, not taking somebody else's responsibility, just own what's ours, So that whole idea of choosing a a harmful thing to try to mitigate negative consequences can ultimately create patterns like I become an untrustworthy person.
Right.
And I might not even realize how deep it is because they're, again, back in childhood, did it for self-protection. And
Right.
now it's just part of what I do. And when somebody says, well, what was your part? And my immediate thought is to deflect, make it
Right.
somebody else's fault or the situation. So I think it takes a certain amount of courage and certainly humility
Yes.
to say, okay, I'm willing to see what's real. Even though I don't want to see it, I know that ultimately it'll do me good.
Right. Right. Because we're trying to create a sense of integrity. And
Yes.
people who have integrity are humble and honest, among other things.
We're so glad you're here with us today. If you like our work and want to support our efforts, you can subscribe to our Patreon and receive exclusive content. We'll leave a link for you in our description.
Another part of evaluating where you went wrong is also how what you did affected other people.
Right.
Because you're not usually the only person in the situation.
Right.
I mean, if we go back to my, episodes of binging, at the moment, to me, it may seem like, well, I'm the one eating this. It doesn't bother anybody else. But, if I end up with some health problem that compromises my ability to take care of my family, that means that they're now being affected by a choice I made.
Right.
Yes.
And, we don't tend to think in those kind of objective terms like, well, if I get, 100 pounds overweight and I develop diabetes, that's going to have a negative impact on my family. We don't really think about those in the moment, right? We think about how much we want this thing or want to do that thing or whatever.
Yeah, that whole self-gratification. I want to feel better,
Mm-hmm.
but not really thinking through what would happen if I did this and then kept doing it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
I think the majority of the problem is not thinking it through first and having an emotional reaction to whatever's happening. Because I found the times when I've put, like we talked about, put the emotions aside and thought it through, I usually didn't react and end up with a negative consequence. I thought it through instead, and essentially, in the context of binging, told myself no.
Right.
Because I think for myself, reacting emotionally has always been a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can take a step back and assess the situation and say, I don't need that right now. I can deal with this without it. It's much better. And
Yeah.
another thing I want to briefly mention was the other side of the problem with negative consequences is how the other person reacts. A lot of people are scared, to be honest, because they're like you told, somebody told you were a thief.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're putting that on a child who's maybe not innocent, but relatively innocent, that can create problems and trauma because that's not what actually happened. They maybe didn't do it. Chances are the child did not do it with insidious intentions. They just did it because they wanted it.
Like a more impulse.
Right.
Right.
So the issue is more about impulse control, self-control, not the theft per se.
Right.
Right.
But the whole idea of how does it affect the other person? I was recently talking to someone and I asked this person, while you were saying those things to me, did you notice how I was reacting? Did you look at what my face was doing?
Mm.
Because the person was basically justifying, the things that were said and not really taking responsibility. Well, I was just saying how I felt or, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But, what we say has the power to lift up or tear down another person. The things we do have the power to, really create good, positive, healthy relationships or to just ultimately destroy them.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very sobering, responsibility that we carry, not only to ourselves, as you said, but to others and then on out into our families, our workplace, our day-to-day lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the next question we have, which I think we're at a good spot to sort of transition to the next thing, is why did I do that?
Right?
Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's a slightly different question than where did things go wrong, because, we're kind of trying to objectively look at what happened,
Right.
who got hurt, defining things in a more objective way, admitting to taking control, or admitting to, doing the thing that we did.
Right.
This question of why did I do that requires us to look inward.
Yeah. And I like how we're moving deeper and deeper into this subject. What were my motives? What's underneath the surface, right? I yelled, and I own that I yelled, but why did I yell?
Right.
Why did I choose to blow up instead of reining myself in?
Right.
Or, whatever the circumstance may be.
Right. And, sometimes there aren't exactly, motives. Sometimes it's just internal or external factors that affected me. Like, I was hangry.
Yeah.
Right.
It was 5 p.m. and I wanted my dinner. There's
Right.
really no motive there except that you want food.
Right.
You're feeling grumpy.
Right. Just feeling grumpy. And there doesn't have to be an emotional reason why you're feeling hangry. It could just be that you were hungry, or maybe you didn't get enough sleep, or maybe
Right.
your boss got on your case about something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even looking at what was going on at the time.
Mm-hmm.
What was the situation? So what were some of the external factors?
Right.
Like, for example, when my kids were growing up, usually would start with something kind of small, and then the kids would start arguing and things would start to escalate. And then I would start to get frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I would end up yelling or harshly dealing with the problem instead of, as you mentioned before, being in my wise mind. So what led us here, And I usually find it's a combination of things.
Mm-hmm. I
I forgot to eat breakfast. The kids really needed a nap, and somehow that got past us.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking of the time my son was basically losing his mind, and I wasn't handling it very well. And then I realized, well, what did he have for breakfast? Oh my gosh, Cocoa Puffs. Oh, and I let him have hot chocolate.
Oh dear.
And I'm going, oh, geez, Louise, Mama, what were you thinking?
Right. There's too much sugar that early in the day for a little kid.
No wonder he's and I'm getting frustrated.
Yeah. It's hard to realize that sometimes our choices lead to these sorts of things, like food affects your mood.
Yep.
Depending on what you ate.
Mm-hmm.
A lack of sleep will affect your mood.
Yeah.
Any number of things that are just sort of like not really, they're not, how do I put this? They're not necessarily extraordinarily bad things. They're just sort of things that happened. But we don't think about how these things affect us. Like, if you get, a lot of people experience this hangry thing in the evening.
Mm-hmm.
Their blood sugar's low, which leads to brain fog, which can lead to a number of different cognitive breakdowns.
Yeah.
And before you know it, they just want food, and then the problem's solved, right?
Right.
So, I feel like taking those things into account is really important.
Yeah. And also, we think about, is there some emotion that's rising up that maybe, or that rose up, I should say, that didn't quite fit, or it was too much? Yeah. I know one of the things that I've struggled with is lateness. Mm. And when I'm late, I would feel this deep sense of shame.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's terrible. You're messing everybody else up, and going all the way to, how could you be so inconsiderate? Don't you care about other people? Mm-hmm. And once I got to the root of like, okay, you do need to be on time, but what is this intense shame?
Right.
And to realize that as a child, it was drilled into me that it was just unacceptable to be late, but I had a tendency to be late. And so there's this, shame thing that became attached, and that clouds things up. Like, instead of just calmly solving the problem and making sure I take the steps to be on time next time, now I've got this shame monster.
So if that's sort of a cycle that you've been caught in, what sorts of things would you do if you're feeling shame about being late, for example? Like you're in the moment, you're running late.
Yeah.
And the feeling arose. Like there might be internal, external factors that made you late. Let's say, I don't know, the clothes weren't dry in the laundry and you needed an outfit and that delayed you like 10 minutes. That would be something you may or may not have had control over, which is kind of a neutral problem.
Right.
But then you also feel shame about it, right? So how would that affect your behavior when you're dealing with, the person that you are meeting or whatever?
So if I'm not actually taking a moment and thinking about it, because, just sort of reacting emotionally, I have to hurry up and solve this. I have to hurry up and get there as soon as I can. I need to let them know and just sort of frantically trying to fix it. When the fact of the matter is, I'm late. I'm going to be late. I can't turn back time. But that, shame is never a good place to solve a problem from.
Right.
So our perspective is what matters. It's what we think of ourselves and how we handle the situation, and keeping your perspective, not letting shame take control or some other negative emotion take control, because that can just derail you from solving the problem.
Yeah. I wouldn't call any emotion negative.
Right.
I think emotions are just neutral. I think shame is kind of one of those things that gets said a lot. Like there is an aspect of shame. Like if you commit a crime, let's say you murder someone, you should feel shame about that.
You absolutely should. Yeah.
Right? So there is a place for the feeling of shame in life.
Right.
But it's not necessarily something you want to apply to yourself over things like being late or forgetting to brush your teeth or any number of things that you might feel.
Right.
Go ahead.
I was thinking it's not that it's negative, it's more it's misplaced.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Good way to put it.
So, when we're talking about negative outcomes, negative consequences, and we're discussing, internal feelings that arose when we took an action. The logic here is there was an additional motivation to behave a certain way that had nothing to do with just circumstances. So one way that I feel like I can put it is, I'm married, and sometimes my husband does things that upsets me, and I might say something to him about it in kind of a mean way.
Yeah.
Or I might yell at him about it or something like that.
Right.
And, I guess at this point in my life, I recognize that yelling at someone because you're upset isn't really the best way to get across your point.
Right.
Right.
Or to help the situation get resolved. So I'm working on doing that less.
Right.
But I have to ask myself, why did I yell? If the situation is something like, did you put the laundry in the laundry machine? And he says no. The feelings that come with that might be anger. Why am I angry about that? It's not putting the laundry in may have been he just forgot or he was too busy but maybe there's some like ongoing bitterness or resentment about it, right? It has nothing to do with the circumstance at hand.
Right.
So I allow the bitterness or the resentment to rise up, and then I say something out of that place that is harmful and hurtful.
Yes.
And I have to ask myself, why did I go there? Why did I allow myself to speak that way to my husband? Because then, eventually I have to go back and ask for forgiveness because I was kind of tart with him. And, and that's where we're really headed with this. What feelings came up that caused us to behave that way?
And did I choose, there's that choice again, to say punish the person or vent my frustration or give voice to my resentment,
right?
Instead of choosing to, deal with those emotions on a healthy basis and just take care of the situation from a wise mind.
Right.
I like that phrase.
Yeah. My therapist would be glad that you like that phrase.
I feel like I need a t-shirt,
I'm in my wise mind.
I'm in my wise mind. And if I'm not, how can I get there from here?
Right. So one of the factors in evaluating why did I do that is asking myself, why did I compromise my values? And as a Christian woman, one of the values is patience. If I'm not being patient with my husband, it's coming out as resentment.
Right.
Yeah.
Like if he simply forgot to do the laundry and there's no real reason why, he just simply forgot, am I justified in my anger?
Right. Yeah. I mean, then that really is compromising your values because you value basically the opposite of that, right?
Yeah.
So, taking an emotion that didn't apply and then misapplying it, it's going to lead you away from your values. It just is.
Right.
If you value honesty, but yet you're covering up.
Right.
Yeah. Well, why did I do that? I can't stand liars. Lying, it's just repulsive to me, and yet I lied.
Right.
Why did I lie? Why did I think that was a good idea in the moment? Where did that come from?
Right. Right.
And I don't want to do that anymore because I don't want that to become a pattern.
Right. Which is our next point.
Oh.
What are my tendencies?
What?
And tendencies are more like behavior patterns based off of your beliefs, your personality, rituals that you might have created for yourself at some point in your life. By rituals, I don't mean altars and incense and whatever. I'm talking about things that we do on a regular basis, and we tend to do them in the same way.
Right.
So brushing your teeth every night is a ritual.
And a good one.
And a good one.
Yeah.
What are my tendencies? To brush my teeth before I go to bed.
Right. So,
sorry.
But in a situation of negative consequences, I've mentioned before, I'm a bit of a hothead.
You? What?
Shocking.
Shocker.
I mean, I'm talking about biting my husband's head off because he forgot to do the laundry. Well, that would be in the category of my tendency to be a hothead.
Mm-hmm.
There's another factor involved in not just I had resentment towards him about something, but I also have this tendency to overreact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I've had a tendency to react to not being able to find things as part of frustration of possibly having ADHD. And I'm trying to mitigate that by just stopping and thinking about it and not overreacting, because I always overreact to things like that. It's stressful. I feel stupid. I feel ashamed.
Yeah.
I can't find something, and I can't remember what I did with it. I can't remember the last thing I did with it or where I put it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And
totally
so
relate.
having a ritual in mind of, for example, hanging my keys up by the door every time I come in the house, because if I don't do that, I'm probably going to lose them or forget where I put them. And I won't be able to find them when I need them again. So that type of thing has been a big problem for me, not overreacting to losing or misplacing something, and just trying to be proactive and create a ritual to put it in the same place every time.
Yeah.
I remember where I put it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when we think about our tendencies, I think there again, we need to be objective.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I have a tendency to do X, whatever it happens to be.
Right.
Do I want that to continue? And then from that place, I can say, okay, the thought I had was about acceptance. I
Right.
choose to accept this about myself.
Mhm.
Right.
I may not like it, but I choose to accept that these are my tendencies. I've been told by friends, 2 of whom are in the room right now, that, about my tendencies that have caused them harm.
Mm.
Do I want to hear that? No, I don't like to be that person that hurts other people.
Right.
But being able to sit down and go, okay, is this true?
Right.
If so, and it usually is, faithful are the wounds of the friend. They're pointing out something. Now I have an opportunity to say, yes, it's true. I choose to accept it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what am I going to do differently?
Right. Which brings us to our last point is the last question. What can I do differently in the future? That's a really important question because all of this is pointless unless you're willing to do something about it.
Yeah.
And
Or else
not suffer a consequence again.
yes. It's like getting on the hamster wheel. Oh, I see I have a tendency to lateness, huh? And I'm late and I continue to be late. Wait.
Right. And then you have to deal with the consequences of being late.
Right.
And if you don't like the consequence, then don't be late.
And the thing is, though, like as we're getting down to the practical side of things, I'm always so grateful for this because people would say that, well, just stop doing it. And we even
Right.
tease each other by saying, well, stop it.
Right. Right.
Well, I need
Just
a
stop
plan.
it.
I need a strategy. I need a, number one, do this,
Right.
So I love this part. Here's where it gets practical, guys.
So, one of the things we talked about is starting with reevaluating your values. Like
Mhm.
what's important to you?
Yeah.
Like, does your desire to honor other people's time override your desire to do whatever you want and be late?
Yeah. So that idea of choosing to honor someone else, that can
Mhm.
also be a good motivation for change.
Right. And if you confirm with yourself that that is important to you,
Mhm.
then you're more likely to make better choices in the future.
Yeah.
Yep. That's
Right.
true.
I want to be a good friend. I want to be a good coworker. What does that look like?
Right.
So,
So the next point we have here is adjusting your own attitude. Being a kid who grew up in the 80s, attitude adjustment was something that we heard
yes.
a lot.
Yes, that phrase.
It was used by our parents to sort of like indicate that whatever was coming was going to help us behave better in the future.
Right.
Depending on what it was. I think our mother's favorite attitude adjustment was to make us go shovel horse poop out in the field.
Oh,
Yes.
good times.
Yeah. For having an attitude, that's what she made us do.
Yep.
I don't know that it worked. I don't
Probably
think my
not.
attitude got better.
Angrily shoveling.
But it did give us time to go and cool down and like reevaluate how we wanted to act in the future towards her, because being the kind of abusive mother she was, her anger was volatile and violent.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
at the very least, even if it wasn't having the effect she intended, it was helping us to like decide sort of how we wanted to act in the future to avoid whatever she was going to throw at us the next
Right.
time. But as an adult, you can look at yourself and say, wow, that's a really crappy attitude.
Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
Yeah. Part of being honest, with ourselves and what really was going on there was like, yeah, I was kind of acting like a jerk right there.
Mhm.
And that's not okay because that's not what I want in my life.
Right. Right.
But how can I get rid of it if I'm not saying, yeah, I was a jerk?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No excuses.
Right. No excuses. You're going to admit to it if you want to move on.
Yeah.
And then finally, the last 2 points we have is to next time choose a different path and keep practicing doing the right thing. Those two things
Yeah.
are tied together because as a martial art instructor, something I see quite a bit is people practicing whatever technique I've given them. And then I make an adjustment to something they're doing, and they can get, what's the word I'm looking for? They can get kind of negative about it. Kind of like, well, I've been practicing it this way for so long, and now I've been doing it wrong all this time, or feeling like they can't get it.
Yeah. Right.
Because it's too hard or something like that. But, as I try to say to people, it's just a matter of time. It's a matter of consistency, and it's a matter of trying.
Right. And being on the receiving end of said correction, hi, sensei, I have to do an attitude adjustment in the moment. And I tell myself, sensei's giving me some really good information here.
Right.
And this is going to make my technique better. It's not about, oh, look at you doing the wrong thing. It's about, here's an adjustment you can make so that going forward, you're going to be better. Mm-hmm. And now if you continue to do it this way, see this angle, now practice that. And ultimately it gets us where we want to go.
Right. And the key here is just not to give up. If you are determined to do the right thing and the same situation comes up and you react similarly to the previous time, even after you've gone through all these steps and you've determined what you want to do in the future, just try again. Yeah. I'm sure you'll have another opportunity to practice doing the right thing.
And don't shame yourself when you mess up again.
Right. That's a really important point. Yeah. It's not to unnecessarily apply shame to yourself.
Yeah. Just because you mess up doesn't mean you're a mess up.
Right.
Just because you failed because you tried.
Right.
And it didn't quite work.
Right. Failure and success are tied together through effort.
Right.
Yeah. So what if I tried again? What if I got up and said, all right, I messed up. I know I hurt her and I need to apologize. Mm-hmm. What can I do differently? And then using that as, I don't want to cause that pain again. Mm-hmm. I'm going, there's the motivation.
Right.
Now I'm going to choose to honor her by making sure I do, whatever it was that needed to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like we've kind of gotten to where we needed to go with this.
Yep. I agree.
It's been a good ride.
Yeah, indeed. So we want to thank you for joining us today on this episode of the Mama Bear Initiative podcast. We hope you enjoyed what we had to say about dealing with negative consequences, otherwise known as bruh. And we look forward to being with you next time. Bye, Bear Club.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thanks so much for joining us as we discussed such an important topic. We hope you got some food for thought and encouragement to keep going and keep growing. See you later, Bear Club.
Remember to join the Bear Club on our Patreon page for exclusive content. The link is in the description. You can find our podcast on Google, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.